Methods and means may change, but the good news of the gospel is the same. Sometimes we mix method or delivery with what the gospel is. We'll discuss with Pastor John Boston the creative ways to present the gospel of Jesus Christ. Welcome. You are watching Ministry in Motion, where we share best practices for your ministry in the 21st century. Pastor John Boston, the new associate of the North American Division Evangelism Institute. Man, I am glad you're here with me today.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here. Glad to be home.
Yes. Let's talk about what you do for a living and what I have experienced you doing very well, and that is creative evangelism. You know, sometimes we get caught up in the method and the mode, and we baptize it and act as if that's what's it. But can you change methodology? Can you change the delivery, but still have the same old gospel?
Absolutely. I think one of the most powerful things that we have working for us, we plan more events than anybody in the world. So we can put we can put it together better than anybody. And so how we present it, how we package it is not always the most critical challenge that we face. It's our willingness to actually step out, do something creative, and contextualize it. Find the core values of the city we're serving, the region we're serving, and make sure that it's going to tap that need. It's going to touch what it is that community needs more than anything.
Now, you know, most pastors have to learn this in the journey, and you're not that old. Is this a gift? How did you start thinking creatively to reach your community? Because everyone doesn't have that default. You know, sometimes you have to learn by knocking your head against the wall. I can't do it this way the next time.
Sure.
But where did you get these creative juices from? I know they came from the Creator.
Absolutely.
But tell me about your experience in doing creative evangelism.
Well, I grew up in a unique time. I grew up when tent meetings were still happening. I remember driving the chairs back to the campground with my father. I sat and listened to E.E. Cleveland preach and Ron Halverson. So I grew up during a beautiful transition of the greats and where we are now.
Right.
But I think for me in my personal journey, I believe that you can learn something from everybody.
Right.
And you can pick something up, even if it's a small thing, and you begin to put those pieces together. I had great mentors in evangelism. Even Ivan Williams. I've looked at things Ivan Williams has done, and I've said, this is something that I want to do, and I go and try. I think there's a science to evangelism, and more important than anything is that you have to be willing to step out. You know, people make investments in the stock market and make investments and things, but make that investment. I think it's a really big, important thing.
Awesome. Well, let's go down this lane then. You've pastored in several cities. What is some of the creative stuff you've done to win souls for Christ? And what has worked, and what, if you will be transparent, what hasn't worked?
I will be transparent.
Okay.
Well, I believe in public evangelism, but I also believe in transformative evangelism, where everything is working together. The Sabbath worship experience. We kind of had a saying when I was pastoring in one church, where if a ministry is not leading people to Christ, then we need to abandon it and go for something else. And I know every ministry it doesn't have to be evangelistic, but for me it does. That's my heart. But with creative ministries, I think one of my favorite creative things that we did, I was pastoring in a city with lots of young people. Families were moving there in droves. And so reaching children was really important. And what we decided to do was speak a language that would catapult us to become the spiritual leaders of that city, particularly young families and children. And so we invited the Veggietales live show.
The who?
The Veggietales Live. And so they had a stage production, and Bob and Larry, they came, and
Wow.
we had about 2,800 people show up. And that was probably the sum total of more than all the Adventists that were even in the city regularly attending church. And we were targeting, and from that, it created a ripple effect of the ministries that we provided for the community we served.
So you brought in VeggieTales to reach who?
You got to know who you're trying to reach.
Okay.
When I go fishing, I don't try to catch a bass the same way I try to catch a catfish. Okay, so
You don't eat catfish.
I don't eat catfish, and I don't eat bass either. So, but I like to catch them.
Right.
But the point of that is that we wanted to reach children because we believe that children was the key to reaching families.
Got it.
And that was our core focus. And so because we focused on that, we needed to bring someone that wouldn't compromise our identity, but at the same time would give us that cutting edge to reach their hearts. And the city took notice of that.
That's amazing. For the listeners or viewers who don't know what VeggieTales is, would you tell them? What is VeggieTales?
Sure, it's a children's animation. It's a production company, actually,
Right.
and they produce these value-based videos and movies for children to better understand God's love and His care.
So you connected the dots. If you reach the children, you are also able to reach the parents.
Absolutely.
Have you found that to be a consistent theme in evangelism?
Oh, without a doubt. It's the only thing that comes close to it is reaching the fathers, reaching the men, and so for me, consistently that works. In some instances, there are things that we did that were not sustainable, and for all intents and purposes, they failed. We tried to provide a meal every day of the week for all of the children that wanted to eat in the city because childhood poverty was an issue, and it was just too large a scale for us to take on. And so one thing I definitely recommend, if you find yourself failing, it may not mean you need to abandon the ministry. You may just have to scale it down a bit so that you can sustain it.
Adjust, yeah. You know, I applaud you. Some people don't fail because they don't try anything. And it sounds like you've never been afraid of trying something for the Lord. I do remember reading in the writings of Ellen White, she says, nothing ventured, nothing gained.
Absolutely.
And so that is huge for me. You know, a pastor may be saying, well, Pastor Boston, you're now at the North American Division Evangelism Institute. You probably had all the resources you wanted to try all of this creative stuff. What would your response be to that?
One of my mentors was very effective at raising money, not because he asked for money, but because he stayed true to our identity as Seventh-day Adventists. When we are disingenuine, people can read that. But when we're true to our identity, God begins to provide things for us, especially financial resources, to accomplish the work that needs to be done. I remember when we did VeggieTales, for instance. That's one instance, and that did cost a lot of money.
Sure.
But there were people who didn't feel we should waste God's resources doing that. And I sat in a meeting. I explained why I thought it would work, along with the others that thought it would work.
Right.
And an 82-year-old woman, she said, Pastor, how much do you need? I said, well, this is what we need. She said, I'll bring you a check in the morning.
Wow.
And so, like one preacher says, if it's God's will, it's God's bill.
I like that. You're smiling about that.
Yeah.
I will remember that. Tell me about creative evangelism in this sense. You know, we are, quote unquote, competing, not against flesh and blood, but against spiritual wickedness in high places. We don't have the amount of resources it takes to combat what's being produced, what's being shown, what's on the phones, and you know, we just don't have that deep pocket like that.
Yeah.
How would you compare using creative evangelism to impact the world in a way that, say, Hollywood impacts the world?
Sure.
You know, a pastor may be listening who's in a rural town. One pastor may have 3 churches. Another one may not have any associates. He's alone. She is pastoring alone. He is pastoring alone. Give them some hope. What would you share with them? Where should they start in being creative?
I think one, I do want to acknowledge that resources help, and having and I don't want to act like it doesn't matter. It does matter. It makes a difference. But what I have found is that when you can align your ministry with the needs of the community, basically you're aligning core values. For instance, in one city we served in, they had a high infant mortality rate. So children weren't surviving past year one for whatever reason. And we realized that that was an issue for the city. And so we began an initiative that we partnered with the city on called Celebrate One. So every child
1 year of age?
Every child that made 1 year of age, we provided a little birthday party for them.
Wow.
We do church potlucks all the time. So it was just a matter of adding a cake and some balloons. And so that really helped us reach a lot of hearts. And I think we have to keep in mind that we have something that's really more valuable than anything, and that is the hope in the soon coming of Jesus Christ.
Sure.
Pastor, I don't know how everybody feels about this, but I can tell you in my ministry, when I tell people I am doing this because I believe that God loves you more than anything, and He's coming soon to repair everything broken. When I'm crystal clear about my confidence in the Advent, that's inspiring to people.
Sure,
they say, if you believe it, maybe I should believe it too, because I need that kind of hope. Even from Veggietales, so you had that event with the mothers, with the children that turned 1 year old. We just started doing baby showers. Just someone needed to let us know. The city started funding it. Then the city said, what else are you doing for ministry? We said, well, we have something called the Path Finders. Just a simple repackaging, and it's a youth mentoring program, and it's based on Christian principles. And they said, well, what does it take to run? We gave them a budget. The city gave us $100,000 so that we could operate that. What I'm saying to you is that we made sure all of our ministries were impacting lives, but it wasn't just indifferent benevolence. We did treat those things as though they were critical to soul salvation.
You know, I want to rewind just for a minute. Meeting community needs. What would you share with a pastor? How did you build these connections with the city? How did the city come to even trust you with the delivery of financial support? If I'm moving in a town as a pastor, what would you share with the pastor about connecting with the city fathers, finding out what the needs are? You know, you're going to be teaching and working out of a seminary base soon. You're going to have young minds, young in ministry, maybe some who've never experienced evangelism. So how do they find out the community needs?
Well, as a pastor, you're the spiritual leader of the city. You have to see your responsibility as pastor for the city.
Not just that church.
You're not the pastor of the church. You couldn't possibly be the pastor of the church because you're serving in that church the citizens of that city. And so you have to be the pastor of the city. That means calling the mayor, Mr. Mayor or Mrs. Mayor, I'd like to schedule a meeting with your office. I want to come and talk. The chief of police, the fire department. But more significant than that, knocking on the doors, visiting homes. I made it, my wife, she knew when I said I'm leaving church and I'm on my way home, she knew that on my way home, that meant another 30 minutes because every day I knocked on a new door to introduce myself to the people in that community. That didn't cost any money.
No, it didn't. That's amazing. I have a friend who said, make friends before you need friends.
That's powerful.
So you mean mayors, city fathers, when they say come in and, you know, I go knock or pastor knocks, what does that conversation look like? Are you asking something? Are you offering something? What is the basis of that relationship?
I'm offering something. I'm not asking if we could get a free parking lot or a building on the other side of town. I'm saying, how can I support what you're trying to accomplish? Let me know what it is you're doing. Give me a chance to go back and talk to the church, and let's see how we can support you. It doesn't always mean financial. Sometimes it simply means prayer for us. When we were having a big challenge with lethal force used on young men and women of color across America, and the tension that created. We
Right.
went to the city, we said, you tell us how we can help you navigate this, because we don't want this to happen here.
Right.
That caught the attention of some of the mothers of victims, Trayvon Martin's mother and Sandra Bland's mother and Michael Garner's mother, and they came to our church and they said, we appreciate that you're not just protesting, you're not just trying to find a way to fight, you're trying to find a way to change things.
Right.
And creating that environment, it simply takes a willingness to sit at the table, listen, and try to find a solution.
Creative evangelism in the urban setting and in the rural setting, is there a difference?
Big difference, very
Okay.
big difference. I pastored in both. I've been in a church where 5 people show up, in the middle of, some people would say nowhere, but I thought it was a beautiful place. And then I've been in associate on a team of thousands of members show up on a Sabbath.
Sure.
Very big difference, but there's one key critical component that's the same throughout, and that's being authentically present in the community. And whether that's in an urban context where you're dealing with gun violence, or in a rural context where farmers don't have enough to provide feed for their cattle, and you working with other counties and leaders to try to get some water on their property for them.
Wow.
That makes a difference. And I think, Pastor, when you meet a need, then when people realize that there's something more than the water that they needed, they want to know, what was your connection? Why were you willing to care for them the way you did? And that's a beautiful opportunity to say, this is because of the love of Jesus Christ.
Wow. You know, on the continent of Australia, you won souls. You've won souls here in this division and in this country. What drives you to continue to connect, to win souls, baptize people, and disciple them? What is your driving unction, I guess?
At this point in my journey, I am deeply compelled by a confidence that Jesus will come soon.
Sure.
I believe he will come soon. And if I lose sight of that, I wouldn't have any impetus to try to tell people that he's coming and that we should give our lives to him, because he can do much better with it than we could.
Sure.
And so that really is the driving force. I believe that we're closer now than we've ever been. Okay. And I think it's a critical junction in the history of the world, because we have this cooling down in the faith community in some sense, and we have this heating up in the secular context.
Right.
And that makes for a perfect storm. And I think there's no better time than right now to tell people Jesus is coming. And in all of the creative things we've experienced, God's allowed me to be a part of, and I think that they were unique, and it wasn't always me, it was other people around me.
Right.
I think one thing that's been critical, people think if I don't share the Advent message, then we'll be more appealing. But in my experience, sharing the Advent message is the most appealing and hope-filled message that people have heard in their lives, and they're really willing to follow after.
That's amazing. So, not being ashamed of our name, not being ashamed of what we believe. And by the way, you know, I consider you a young adult.
I am. I'm the oldest millennial.
I appreciate that. What about reaching young adults for Christ? You know, we hear all of these stats about them leaving the church. But what have you found in that whole context of winning them, reaching them, and God using them? Any thoughts?
I think engagement is not always in the context that we want it to be in, where we say, hey, you do this on Sabbath, or you take the service on Saturday, on Sabbath morning. It doesn't always function like that. Engagement is critical. Our church that I pastored most recently, just 2 years ago before I left the States, we had a lot of young adults involved, and they were involved in service.
Sure.
We had young thoracic cardiac surgeons, we had young physicians and lawyers and entrepreneurs and students.
Right.
And that was because they were engaged in reaching people. And I think it's in service that young adults meet Christ best.
So would you say service is an insulator from leaving or attractions outside of the faith?
I think it's definitely an insulator. It anchors them. And a lot of young people are not wanting to leave Christ, and they're not wanting to leave church. They're wanting to leave church as they know it.
Ah,
And so you've got to give them something different and something more. And that's really what the church is about. It's about making sure that people fit so that other people can fit.
John, I am excited that you're on the team here and that you're going to be helping seminarians to learn how to connect with the community and win souls. And I look forward to not only working with you, but I'm just grateful for you sharing your story here on Ministry in Motion.
Thank you, Pastor Williams.
Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Pastor John Boston talked about creative evangelism and shared 6 things about it. First, he said, it is important to know who you are trying to reach to be effective in evangelism. Number 2, he said, nothing ventured, nothing gained. If it's God's will, it's God's bill. I like that. Number 3, he said, connect your core values and ministries to the issues of the city that you're trying to reach. If you are a pastor, you're not just the pastor for that church, but the entire city. Visit residents and leaders in your city, offering your support. Number 5, creative evangelism must adapt depending on the community, whether urban or rural. Last, he shared, service is an anchor for young adults to be involved and to stay in the church. You're watching Ministry in Motion, where we share best practices for your ministry in the 21st century. Join us via podcast, YouTube, and Facebook, starting at ministryinmotion.tv. Until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you.